will be moving on to the second session of the day. Now, as Ben has already pointed out, our expert valuers, I'm sure you're all very busy people, so you can drop off now, and Ben will stay to capture any additional questions if there are any, and then we will work out how to best give responses to our participants, to those questions that we just ran out of time for. So yeah, I know the original agenda planned for a session that would bring you some more case studies, but given that we have a very large number of issues that you want expanded on, the organizing team decided to focus on responding to your questions. So the second session will not really be a case study session, so there will be no presentations for this one, but we will continue in this style. But instead of, the expert valuers, I will kindly ask for my MDB colleagues to kind of take the floor. So basically what we've done is we've collated all your questions from from the previous 2 Mondays and some of the homework, some of the feedback form questions that you prepared in anticipation of this day, and we've tried to organize them into a couple of key topics. So some questions on policy and eligibility, then national frameworks versus MFI requirements, compensation delivery, consultation and settlement of grievances, and some other questions that cannot be really grouped into a certain category, but include depreciation, easements, etc., etc. So for this session, Zaruhi Harapetian, Senior Social Development Specialist from from the Office of Safeguards at ADB, Guoqing Zhou, Senior ES Specialist from the ESG Department from NDB, and Su Tranquai, Social Development Specialist, SFD from AIIB, together with his colleagues who are sitting in the conference room with him. So Su, you'll correct me if I don't get all the names, but it's Partha Ghosh, Senior Social Development Specialist, Maya Gabriela Villilius, Senior Environmental Specialist and also Registered Land and Asset Appraiser, and Palumi Fadare, Social Development Consultant, so all from the same department in AIIB. We'll be expanding on these topics that I just mentioned and the specific questions that were raised under them. So let's start with the first one, which is on policy and eligibility, and I kindly invite Zara to give us a bit of context on the topic, and then she will kind of do she has already prepared a narrative that kind of captures all the questions that were put under this topic. So Zara, please, over to you to start us off.
Thank you, Ines. Thank you. Probably I would like to start from the very, very beginning when we, with MCDF and colleagues from AIIB and NDB, started to think about this training and about the agenda. Our initial target group were our counterparts from the government who are working on involuntary settlement. And usually they are starting to work on resettlement, and they need really to understand different concepts, including valuation. But we noticed that there are a lot of consultants in the room, so we are getting very different types of questions on valuation, on involuntary settlement, questions with different level of details, and even advices on a particular case studies. On a particular examples. We probably will not be able to take examples of the projects and advise you because it's very context specific, country specific, but we will provide some general insights. So I would like to start with several questions that were relating to the policy issues and eligibility issues. A last discussion in last 10 minutes about easements, it demonstrates the difference between how to calculate unit rate for something and what does it mean compensation for a particular impact. Now in the resettlement plans, we have that frameworks, entitlement metrics that defines who is eligible for what. And some entitlements are compensation for market value for land. The others, again, could be monetary, but they are not referring to a particular price for an asset. For example, transportation costs or related to easements, how to approach. Should it be long-term payment, or it should be one-time payment at the beginning. In some projects, for example, if use is restricted, governments are paying for that restricted use. For example, if you will not be able to construct residential house, then you are provided with an option either to fully acquire the land plot on the transmission line, or to give the difference between agricultural land and residential land, because on agricultural land you will not experience any restrictions. So these type of approaches are policy level decisions that are made by resettlement specialists usually, and it's very helpful to ask valuation specialists for advice on how to define, for example, if it's transportation allowance for a person to move belongings, what could be the approach, how we can approach that, and then valuation specialists can define what formula to use to calculate. But should it be 5 tracks, or should it be the distance of 40 kilometers or 100 kilometers, or we need to move belongings to the nearby community? These type of things are more decisions that will go to the entitlement metrics. So these have to be done by social safeguard specialists, and preferably in consultation with valuation specialists. Now, to start from the questions on eligibility, we had a question on who is eligible for compensation, and particularly what is the difference between second and third groups of eligible people. I am trying to share my screen with a very simple, can you see? With a very simple chart on 3 types of displaced persons, which are usually compensated and considered under the MFI policies. So the first group are persons with formal legal rights to land. And this group is fully entitled under the policies for compensation for land and all the improvements. And this group is usually also involved in all the additional supports, livelihood restoration program, etc. Then there is a second group, the people who doesn't have formal legal rights, but they have claims to such land which are recognizable or could be recognized under the national legislation. And this group is very different from country to country, depending on how legal framework is framed. Third group are those who has no any registered legal rights to the property, and they cannot claim their rights under the national framework. Now, second group, as you can see on the chart, is eligible both for land and for other improvements when it comes to compensation. Not in all countries it's easy to do, therefore they are initiating legalization procedures. They are defining that rights, registering that rights in order to pay for lost land and assets. The third group is eligible for all the improvements, but not for the land. And improvements are structures, crops, trees, supplementary structures, fences, and other improvements. And the persons could be both companies, there could be families, irrespectively of their vulnerability status. So this third group is eligible for compensation for improvements and also for participating in livelihood restoration programs. There are some countries where governments are deciding to provide additional allowance for land loss, even for those without registered land rights to this third group. But this is very project specific and more of a mitigation by the government of severe impact on, for example, residential household who are losing residents. There was one question linked to this about living in the illegal facilities. So the status of the facility is not important here. More important is if that was constructed by the those who are using those or not. Sometimes there are people who are constructing non-registered structures and they are renting that out. So that type of arrangement could impact the approach of compensation, but those people are eligible for compensation. And related to this topic, there was one question on informal economies and how this could be approached in valuation and also in involuntary settlement processes. Now, when it comes to informal economies, it is about income loss, and income losses as per the objective of the policy. We need to ensure that people can restore their income sources, irrespectively of that being in the formal economy or informal economy. And then how to do that will be defined through consultation with affected people and opportunities that you can have under the project. And there was a particular question on migrant workers, seasonal migrant workers. So of course, every particular example would be better to look at in a particular context. But just as first thoughts, if it comes to seasonal migrant workers, they should be part of livelihood restoration program. There should be analysis of will there be a disruption of their work during project, when project will commence and will be implemented. How will it be disrupted? They should be definitely consulted to understand how project and when project may impact them. And the approaches of livelihood restoration program could be very different depending on, are there any other opportunities for that migrant workers, for example, from nearby region or nearby settlement, or they need some support in terms of development of new skills. The other question related to that was about replacement cost. If it's in rural areas, quality of life and social value of life may be affected. Valuation specialists maybe have some tools to calculate social value of the land, but what we would usually do is to consult with people to see what would be their approaches and fears and understandings, and try to think through strategies that will help to soften the impact on their social life. For example, considering relocation sites, to consider all the community to be relocated in the similar area so that social networks are not disrupted. And one last question that I would like to take under this high-level policy-related questions is about the evaluators. Should it be mandatory to involve evaluator under the preparation of the resettlement plan? In many countries, and in the most countries, evaluators are involved in the preparation of resettlement plan and calculation of the valuations. Sometimes for some of the assets, there may be municipalities involved or local authorities involved. And here we need to ensure that the data that is used by the party who is doing valuation is in line with the replacement cost. So it reflects market value. It is the data is obtained transparently. We can check and verify the data. It is updated. It is valid as of the date of the valuation provided. And particularly ADB's Safeguards Policy Statement defines that the valuation should be conducted by qualified and experienced specialists. So if it is justified that the party who is conducting is qualified and experienced, and if it is demonstrated that the methodology that was applied is in line with the concept of replacement cost and market value, then it could be acceptable. I will stop there and I will open the floor to my colleagues from AIIB and NDB. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zara. So I think this was quite a comprehensive set of responses you gave to the questions that we captured on policy and eligibility. So yes, please, maybe we can start with AIIB and a room full of specialists from sitting with Sue, just to give a quick thought on on some of the things that Zara has said, and then I will pass on to Guoqing from NDB as well to give his view on this set of questions, please. Sue, go ahead.
Basically, we have no differences between two banks. Basically, with ADB perspective, we just want to ask one issue on the first one, on the third categorization. Basically, we have the legal affected household, the recognizable affected household, and the not eligible household. It's easy for the not eligible households. It's like it's clear. But for the second one, the recognizable affected household is always the issue we have to look at. Who are the recognizable affected household? Maybe in some countries they are eligible for having a land use certificate granted, but they have not yet applied for that, or they have not yet applied for the land use right certificate, even they have been using the land for like more than 10 years, and according to the national law, they are eligible to have that land use right or land use certificate granted. So even with no evidence or no legal paper, they should be recognized and they should be considered. They must be considered at the reliable. With the affected household to get compensation and assistance for. But the issue always is what document we really need to include this household into the category of eligible compensation. Do we ask them to provide us with the evidence that they have been in the area for long times, or what kind of information we need to get, we need to collect to identify them as eligible affected households. So another issue is for people, they have no document in hands. But if they have been in the area for long, they have no dispute on land, and they have a certification of the local authority that they have been there for quite a long time and following the government regulation, they must be, they are eligible affected household. Then, in this case, the process should be followed to identify the households at the affected household. So please, yeah.
Right. Thanks. So, and Zara, you actually pointed out very clearly, and that's very important, that these issues are very contextual, right? When we use eminent domain, right? The law varies from country to country, right? There are countries, for example, in South Asia, I worked in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. If it's a usufruct rights, especially for the tribal land, then they are eligible for compensation. Then there are some countries where they say if you have been on that particular piece of land for a certain period of time and have not been challenged by the government, you are again eligible for compensation, right? But these are very contextual things and varies from country to country, right? So obviously they all are eligible, and in AIIB we consider them as title holders, right? Because they are eligible for compensation under some or the other rules. And in several countries, especially in South Asia and East Asia, where land is like possibly both federal and the provincial government has control over that, right? So it's a matter of who covers that. So not only there is a national law, there are several laws which are very specific to a certain province. And then, so when we get into these land acquisition and especially during the entitlement matrix preparation, we have to look into all kinds of legal frameworks, and whether it's a national legal framework, it's a provincial, or could be even the smaller administrative unit, right? So those things needs to be taken care of. Another issue that came up, and so in the question is on the interest to be paid, right? So the question was, if there's a delay between scheduled and actual payment, should we only consider the interest accrued, or how should we also account for the increase in inflation rate? So I guess it cannot be both, right? Inflation rate, if the delay is say beyond a certain length of time, so for example, if it's beyond 1 year, 1.5 years, or 2 years, then obviously it's not interest, but the inflation which would come in, then we'll have to reassess the land value. Normally, we agree that if there is a delay, right, the entitlement matrix would say once the valuation has been done, has been agreed upon with the landowner, within 3 months or 6 months, the compensation should be disbursed to the account of the landowner, and then only physical possession of the land can be taken by the borrower, right? In delay of that, in case there's a delay in disbursement of compensation, then interest takes in, right? So interest could vary from 9% to 12% to 15%. Again, it depends on the particular law of that country, right? But if there is a substantial delay, maybe more than a year, and there has been a lot of land transaction where the value is impacted because of those transactions, then the value again needs to be reassessed, right? So everything may not be very explicitly written in the policy, because policy is principle-based, right? But this needs to be agreed upon with the borrower at the time of entitlement matrix preparation or at the time of project preparation, and should get into the resettlement plan, that these are the things that needs to be taken care of, right? Then again, there was a question where it says, it's very specific to a project, it seems. If there is a specific time frame that should be identified for the payment of compensation due to project delays, such as 2 years or 5 years or more, when land and asset valuation has already been set, what happens if the time frame is not explicitly mentioned in the resettlement plan? So I guess that's a problem with the resettlement plan. Normally, it should be there in the entitlement matrix. Apart from time frame, there are a couple of more things that should be considered for that. One, if the land loser or the project affected person is purchasing new set of land, then the land transaction, the cost of land transaction should be borne by the project, right? It has to pay some stamp duty or some kind of other government tax towards the purchase of land. Then that additional expense should be borne by the project or by the borrower, right? So, but it should be there in the resettlement plan for definitely. If it is not there, then it's a mistake if resettlement plan misses out on these kind of things, because these are additional expenses that the PAP has to bear, right? Anything else on the interest that I'm missing? So
no, that's we have a
yeah, I think that's quite comprehensive. Thank you so much. Maybe just 1 or 2 sentences from Guoqing, and then we can move on to the next block of questions, being cognizant of the time. But yes, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I think when we come into the asset standard status, I think we're always comparing with the formal status of the asset. Like when we talk about the illegal user or informal user, we're talking about the definition of the status of the asset status, right? So if for most of the countries, maybe there are a document or certificate to define if the asset is already illegally owned, things like that. But if you don't have such kind of documents or certificates, we normally call them illegal or informal owned the land or the asset. So then when we be clear with the definition of the asset, then we can look into how to deal with how the country system to deal with this kind of assets, right? So for different one, so we from the point of the perspective of bank, we have a principle that all the assets should be entitled to be compensated. Okay, this is the first point. And second point is, but we need to understand or to follow the regulation requirements. Even for the bank, we also have the similar requirement. like we always set up a cutoff date for the land acquisition and asset inventory, things like that. Before that, then no matter legal or illegal, they could be entitled for compensation and livelihood restoration. But for those after that, to establish the assets, then it would be illegal to do that. I'm not going to go too detail on that point. I just want to highlight these several points. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for all your very comprehensive questions. I think now we can move on to the next block of questions, which are about national frameworks versus MFI requirements. And I think, Sue, maybe it would be useful just to set the context slightly for our participants before we move on to the actual questions. So, how do national frameworks compare with MFI requirements? I think this was briefly touched upon in day one, where, sometimes national requirements don't quite fully live up to, what MDBs expect in terms of compensation. So yeah, I give the floor to you just for a minute or two, and then I will touch upon a few of the interesting questions that we had under this category. So please, Sue, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ines. Actually, we already discussed in the day one and also day two that the NDBs and international financing agency requires to carry out development costs following international standards. However, this is the fact that in some countries, especially Southeast Asia countries, where the governments, and also I think almost all the countries, the government has the national law and regulation on carrying out the development costs. So there are actually some gaps in the concept, in the methodologies, and also in calculation of the compensation unit rate for the affected land and assets. So it's always the discussion and long discussion during the preparation of the resettlement plan that which methodologies should be adopted and which calculation data will be used and reflected in the resettlement plan, and which compensation unit rate that will be used to compensate for compensation to compensate for the affected assets. And another issue is in some countries, they have a separated methodology for calculating and valuation of the compensation. And then they have a separated packet for assistance. And the issue is if we can add the assistance amount into the compensation amount for the affected land and assets to be considered at the replacement cost for the affected land and assets or not. So these are the issue we are facing during planning and implementation of land acquisition and resettlement. Allow me to stop here.
Great, thank you so much. So yes, I think you touched upon, the basics of this grouping of questions. So I think the questions I'll be asking you and other colleagues range from, questions about compensation laws, some concerns about legal issues in the country versus MDB requirements. So Sue, maybe to start you off again with a couple of questions. So here's one that says, someone's asking, some national laws offer compensation at multiples of the official market value to account for depreciation rates and dates, which might lead to undervaluation and justify replacement cost. Is it advisable to follow such laws?
Yes, very straightforward answer is yes. The valuers or the valuators can't follow the government law and regulation. Yes. However,
Perfect.
the principle is there. It's compensation by replacement cost. So then the key important is the values of the compensation of the values, if its value is the same with the replacement cost or not. If following the national laws and regulation, and then application of the depreciation or tax or whatever. So the value is not replacement cost. So we have to again request the client to ensure that compensation by replacement cost. So yes, we follow that, but then if the gaps in the values are there, then we have to ensure that compensation by replacement cost. So then normally we have to discuss the top up, the adjustments to ensure that compensation is by replacement cost.
Perfect. And another one that basically discusses the broader issues of how, various compensatory allowances and rates are integrated or excluded in national compensation frameworks comes from Vietnam, where the government provides project-affected people with transitional and restoration allowances in addition to land and crop compensation. So the question is, can we exclude these transitional and restoration costs from the full replacement cost when we do the assessment for compensation? I think another simple one, but maybe not simple. So please do go ahead.
Yeah, but we are answering from the bank's perspective. The answer is no. Why? Compensation is for the loss assessed, and other assistance like transitional assistance, income restoration, occupational trainings are for the affected household during the transitional time. For example, during the time they have to find the replacement land to buy, during the time they have to establish their affected business, during the time they construct their house. So, and then also the assistance is to ensure that their affected livelihood and incomes are restored as become being affected. This is the principle. So this is the objective of land acquisition and resettlement of the banks, including ADB, NDB, AIIB. So there are two different things, compensation and assistance. So the question is, if we can sum up all and then consider is at the replacement cost for affected land and asset or not, then the answer is no. We just based on, for example, compensation for the land. Then we compare with the market as replacement cost, if it is replacement cost or not. Other assistance are different packets. It's ensure to support for the affected household during transitional time and to ensure their livelihood is restored before being affected. So there are different things. We cannot sum together to consider it replacement cost.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And now I think I'll turn to Zara for a bit for a couple of questions. So one is, I think, very interesting where, it discusses a specific instance where a land acquisition plan was deemed too extensive by the local government. And, the person who asked the question is, worried about the implications. So participant encountered a valuation issue where the LARP approved by the bank was considered too extensive compared to the national framework by the implementing government agency, raising concerns about potential legal ramifications. So maybe, Zara, you can quickly, opine on what happens in that case.
Thank you, Ines. To add to those points and related to the question, if compensation by the law is more than market value, can we then just calculate that it is considered as other elements of replacement cost? And here I will second so that no, we cannot, and we need to, and it will be helpful for the consultants and safeguard specialists to look deeper on why you have these bigger amounts or what is the intent of that. In some countries, there is top up, which is paid for transaction being compulsory. So it's not about replacement. It's an additional top up considered by the government for compulsory type of acquisition, or there could be separate transaction costs covered by the law. Of course, we are not saying that then transaction costs and replacement costs should be paid twice. So you need to go into the details, but whatever top-ups national laws are considering, we are not just just skipping the other elements of the replacement cost. So people should have sufficient compensation to be able to replace their assets. So the question about legal implications when methodology in the resettlement plan is not in line with national regulations. First, we need to remember that resettlement plans are documents of the borrower. And if this is a sovereign project, so the borrower is the government, then the resettlement plan being part of the loan agreement is the borrower's document where borrower agreed on the valuation methodology. And I think so also started with that logic on how we prepare settlement plans and how we discuss. And here probably one advice will be to the consultants who are in the room. Please do consult with government when you are preparing settlement plans. Please present and build their capacity if they are facing involuntary settlement programs for the first time. Explain them what this document is about and share with them the approaches that you are incorporating in the plans. Usually for more for experienced government units who worked with different banks, the staff already knows how to deal with that, and they are trying to resolve that issues during settlement plan preparation and not offloading it for project implementation. There was a question on assessment, something like conflict of interest type of situations. If a municipality is acquiring the property but also is valuing the property. So again, going back to the policies required the valuation to be done by qualified and experienced parties. So if the results of the assessment and if the unit that is doing assessment is qualified and experienced, if methodologies are transparent and will lead to market value, then that could be acceptable. And you can look further to see if there is a need for additional capacity building for that unit or to go deeper into the methodology. Sometimes practical challenges here are that the methodologies are not transparent, and this could become an issue. So better to look during settlement plan preparation on the transparency of methodologies and data, baseline comparable data that is used by the municipalities. And there was one very interesting question on a particular case of lost opportunities. And I think it's very often, the question that is very often raised by affected people. But and also this become quite a big challenge when it comes to complaint resolution. When the case in particular was about the valuation about a case when land is acquired, but there was an architectural design for construction of a property, and affected person is making a claim that the person is losing business opportunities in the future and providing an evidence that on this empty land in 5 years, they would be able to have a business. Now, the policies are not looking at lost opportunities. They are looking at the impact on livelihoods at the moment and on the assets that are established and on the investments that are already done. But in some countries, lost opportunities could be an issue that may be considered under the local legislation, not under the policies. The second aspect of this particular case is the logic of the policy would be if the person has a land in a marketable place where there could be a business, that will be reflected in the compensation for land. And the person will be able to buy similar land in comparable location and start the business there. And the third point is all investments that have been done by affected people on the date of cutoff date, those have to be considered. Now, in this particular case, we should consider preparation of the architectural design as an investment. So if person already developed an architectural design, and in the case it's mentioned that it was approved by a municipality, that could be considered as a part of the compensation package. So that person will be able to buy a comparable land, do a new design, and restart the business. Thank you. I will stop there and open floor for others.
Thank you, Zara, so much. So just to say that we are slowly running out of time and there's still a lot of really interesting questions. So I will ask the participants to put their questions in the chat box. We will pick them up, and if we don't respond to them today, we will find a way to come back to you in an offline way. So I think I will now ask everyone to focus on the third set of questions that we want to respond to, and that is on compensation delivery. So if I could ask Guoqing just to give us, like Zara and Sue did for the first two sets of questions, just a bit of context on compensation delivery in general, and then we can then go into the more specific, interesting questions. So Guoqing, please, over to you on this one.
Okay, we actually have collected 13 interesting questions, and it is very practical, and some of them are very specific, but I think it's linked together with the valuation process. Okay, so we will talk about these issues for detail. The issues here, first one is about if there is a delay between the scheduled and actual payment, should we only consider the interest accrued, and how should we also account for that increase in inflation rate? So for these 13 questions, so the NDB specialist will respond one by one. So from my part, so I will go through the issues that I can answer properly. The first one I would like to respond is about the question: how is compensation determined for a very small apartment, such as those around 15 square meters, when replacements with similarly sized units is not feasible, and what alternative compensation options are considered? So okay, so principally, the project affected people should be able to resettle at least the project to the pre-project level, or better off than that. Okay, and it also depends on the option the individual project affected people choose to resettle. For example, if people can choose to build, people can also choose to build just a similar size home, a new home, like they lived previously, right? When they choose to reconstruct themselves in other land plots. But it's also based on the availability of the policy and the land. And normally, and the project affected people are also entitled to enjoy the minimum size of house plot, or the minimum size of resettlement house in resettlement replacement cost prices. This is also a very practical practice in many project cases. So this is the one I would like to share first. And secondly, there's a question about when should eligible individuals be informed in advance that they will receive compensation. So first of all, we are talking about the information disclosure or statement stakeholder engagement. So when we come to this part of our question, it's always we would like to say it should be started at the very early of the project stage, right? But the content or what we can do, the project can do, is actually depend on the situation. So right. So if the project boundary may not be very concrete at the very beginning of the stage, the information releasing at this point of time is just vague and maybe just provided in the process of consultation with a broader area of the project areas, right? And also when the boundary of the project actually already being concreted, then it's actually comes into the stage of land acquisition and so there formally there could be an official announcement to disclose in the community. We normally call it it is the time of a cut-off date, right? So this is the response I would like to make for this one. And there's a question saying, how is compensation is restricted use due to overhead lines computed when there was no acquisition or displacement? I think this question we have discussed it just now during the first session. But for me, I think we also experienced many kinds of these kind of questions, right? Apart from the information shared by the experts in session 1, I would like to add is we need to consider the situation of the process of the project. Is it based on involuntary resettlement? If yes, then we can follow the market approach, our income approach, right? Sometimes, especially in China, I think, as Professor Shi just mentioned, we also follow the regulated standard that government issued, right? So this is but when we are actually during the project design stage, so the project stage will also affect. So we can discuss, we can negotiate fairly with the landowner about that. Then if the compensation rate cannot be reached, then you can still to adjust your design, because for most of the easement case, so at this design stage we can be more flexible on this part. So this is the issue. And the last one from my side, I want to pick is about a question: is there a time limit for paying annual compensation for land lease? Okay. So the question is about the time limit for paying compensation, right? It is also based on the case we are talking about. It is a involuntary case or a voluntary case. If for most of the time for easements, even in the involuntary case, we still can adjust the design if we are at the design stage, right? It's still based on the negotiation, fairly negotiation, right? So even for the ones that cannot adjust the design, which have involuntary take the line, then the issues can be reached in the agreement, right? So this should be jotted down in the agreement. So this is the first point I want to say. Another thing is for projects like not running. If for investment projects, I mean the investment projects maybe they are not just agriculture-based projects. If for agriculture-based projects, the situation is normally quite different. It's based on fairly negotiation for the payment time. But if for investment projects, they only follow the government issued policy, because it is easier for the investors to handle the disputes when it raises up. So this is the experience. I would like to share here. So here, I think I also missed one problem issues. It's about a question for informal users who have using the land for more than 10 years. How can livelihood allowance alone meet the replacement needs without land compensation? Okay, I think it's not enough, and it's not sustainable to just rely on the livelihood allowance alone to meet the replacement needs. Okay, so I think we should include those informal land users into the livelihood restoration plan at the very beginning of this program. So and they are entitled to enjoy the project measures. Okay, so this is the things I would like to respond from the NDB side, and my colleagues from AIIB, Mrs. Su, maybe you can answer. There's several questions for you. The
So
first
Guoqing,
one,
yeah, maybe I can take over, no problem at all. Thank you so much for the NDB perspective.
okay.
So we are about 15 minutes away from our projected session end, but I think if everyone agrees, we can run a bit over time. So I will just pick a couple of more questions from this block. One is about responsibilities for environmental damages, and I think maybe Zara and Sue can both give their perspectives on, what happens. So I've got two questions in this block, and maybe one of you each can take one of them. So there's one question saying that during the construction process, if there's environmental impact induced or environmental damages caused, who is responsible for paying the compensation? Should it be the contractor or the project management unit? And that one, I think, Zara, you can quickly take. And another similar one, I'll just read them out both so that, we take them all at once, is in cases where construction works have caused damage outside the wayleave corridors, leading to conflicts between the government agency that is responsible for implementing the project and the project host community, who is responsible for paying the damages. So these are both questions relating to environmental damages caused by the project. So Zara, maybe you can start with the first one and then Sue can take the second one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ines. Very complicated question to take it quickly, but we will try. So for further homework for you, you can check ADB's policy involuntary settlement part, paragraph 6, that defines how to approach environmentally induced impacts in terms of documentation. Now, there is no final and straightforward answer here, but you have to consider, is it in the right of way or it's out of right of way? If it's a damage out of right of way that was caused by the contractor has to compensate for that. And it is very useful when bidding documents regulate that process and have references to the resettlement plans. And there is a reference in the entitlement metrics that provides that links of the similar approaches to be applied when damages are done by the contractor during the construction. The other aspect here is was it anticipated or non-anticipated? So there are some damages that could be anticipated by the contractor, and those need to be mitigated either through construction methods, for example, vibration. If due to construction methods selected by the contractor, there is a higher level of vibration that damages the structures, it is the contractor that have to mitigate that, or contractor has to propose other construction methods not to damage the properties as a result of construction works. It's easier to say than to do. In some projects, this is assessed during project preparation, potential impacts of vibration. If it's obvious that there is no other way, there is no other construction method to be applied, and there would be a vibration. In some resettlement plans that we experienced in ADB, preliminary assessment is already done during resettlement plan preparation. So there is a budget for that. It is transparent. So contractors who are participating in the bidding process, they also are aware of that risks, and they are aware of potential sources of budget, for example, from the resettlement plan. And then all the parties could cooperate with each other, supervise the processes, supervision consultant will have a role to play there, and the process will be smooth. So first, to start with identification of potential issues during resettlement plan preparation to define sources of budget. But at the end, if there are damages out of right-of-way when it's cleared by the government and provided to the contractor, other damages have to be covered by the contractor, and contractor should have clear regulations in place, and supervision consultants should be there in the field to supervise these processes and to guide contractor and also the client. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very clear. Sue, maybe just a final thought on that, on environmental damages before we move on.
Okay, that's very quick points on Zara said. I think for environmental impact, it's happened mostly in the construction phase. So for the anticipated impact, the impacts are already specified in the ES and in the environmental management plan. So compensation will be following the provision of the ENP.
Yes,
yes, NP. And then, but for some not anticipated impact, it's only happened during the construction, but not in the environmental management plan or ESNP.
Yeah.
Then, who will pay for that? If it is the failures of the construction method, so then the construction contractor should pay for that. So that's a supplement. But for the second issue is the impact outside of the right way. Zara already touched on that. And who will pay for that? The community or the project? It might not be the community, because it's either it could be the contractor or the PMU or the government, but it might not be the community to pay for that. Why? Because it's a project impact. Why the community have to pay for the impact? And Peto can supplement more on this.
I can supplement.
Zara, I agree what you said, like it has to be a contractor, but the fact is, like, PMU being the employer is primarily responsible for any kind of loss that happens to the community, right? So in that case, compensation has to come from PMU. PMU may penalize contractor and could take different methods of compensating the affected community, but it's always the PMU, and even contract document very clearly lays down that PMU is responsible for managing the contract, and any kind of impact has to be covered by the PMU. So that's only the clarification. But exactly, yes, if something happens and if contractor has done anything wrong, or the vibration thing, or like in one of our projects where they were actually laying stormwater drains and they demolished the wall of a house, right? So contractor actually reconstructed that, but it was PMU's face in the front. Contractor was working for the PMU. So that's a clarification.
I can give an example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, an example just quickly would be going to a project site. They have to create access roads, so they may be affecting areas that are outside of the project but going to the project. So that has to be properly observed under the ESMP, the Environment Social Management Plan, or that they have to do borrow pits to quarry for raw materials and outside the project, but they also have to follow strict mitigation measures. Otherwise, if they don't, then the contractor will have to pay. So that's based on bad construction practices. So the contractor will have to pay for that.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think with that, we can move on to the next set of questions, which pertain to settlement of grievances, but more broadly in the context of consultation. And I think, Guoqing, you have a couple of, salient points to make under this topic. So, I will hand back the floor to you to let you respond to some of the interesting questions that have come out under this set of questions. So please, over to you.
Okay, be very interesting. For this part of questions, I think we already collected 6 interesting questions. Meaning there are many around managing project affected people's expectations, dealing with grievances in the process of land valuation and compensation, and the time. Yeah. So this part our colleagues discuss together how the project can manage these sensitive issues and share their experience and observation in their projects. Okay, so for this one, I will also just go through the one directly that I would like to answer here. So for the first questions, the audience raised is about sometimes surveyors overpromise to property owners to gain access for surveys, resulting in elevated expectations by the time the valuation process begins. Okay, so in order to manage these kind of PAPs or project affected people's expectation, I think our project experience tells us that it should be better to have a good communication strategy in place and get this strategy fully communicate in stakeholders. Okay, this is the first thing, and it is also very important for the project implementation agency to highlight with the stakeholders, including the project affected people, that owning the parties assigned it, like the government department or even a joint working group, has entitled or to answer to release related issues, to do some critical issues that defined it. So in this way, I think the information released by land or asset valuators or surveyors, I think it can be taken into consideration and be managed well. So this is my experience and observation for this specific question. And the second one, I think there are two different questions. I think we can combine together to answer. This is about a grievance management redressing mechanism. Okay. The first one is about how will the project manage ongoing grievances, especially those coming from absentee land owners. And the second one is about have there been complaints about the compensation assessment, and if so, how they are addressed. So it's all about to manage the grievances collected during the land the land and asset evaluation process and even the compensation process. So make sure, first of all, I think people who actually are working on projects, international finance projects or similar projects, they know the grievance redress mechanism or GRM. So we are always to emphasize to make sure an effective GRM in place for a project first. And secondly, I think for the first specific questions, like they say, there is somebody upset, right? The land owners upset. So I think it is one of the very normal cases we are dealing with in the field, right? We should, when the GRM grievance mechanism in place, we should treat them as a normal case. First of all, you should record them and try to get in touch with the owners. And if you can't do that, you always to document these issues and to try to consult with the community leaders and all other key critical stakeholders and to get their suggestions how to deal with these issues. And this is, I think, is a very general process how to deal with grievances. And you should, I think, the things I would like to highlight here is try to document the process and to update or to update the process to chase the dealing process. Okay, so this is the things of the grievance. How the grievance redress mechanism works in the field. And for the second part, they're asking about the complaints for the compensation assessment. So when it comes to the compensation complaints, complaint assessment, there's always many aspects, like, right? So like the result, the people may be complained against the result of census inventory, compensation standard, and valuation process, even the selected valuators, right? So these are all the items that could be the targets, right? Like I would like to raise one example of specific points on that to address the concern for this point. So first of all, we should document the complaints and set up and declare an asset inventory procedure when we are talking about if we talk about the census and asset inventory, right? So we should declare disclose the procedure publicly and make clear that, in my experience, right, people always want to get a bigger looks like a bigger, then they can get more income with the same standards, right? Get more compensation with the same compensation standards. So first of all, get this procedure be clear to everyone, and then and notify to them how to do the process, how you process the process. Like my project, I experienced. So we actually told the public. So if you want to verify the result of the census inventory, then we will use the final result, not the first one. The first one, the existing result could be invalid. So and when people go back to do the verification, actually they always will get the process more strictly, right? So people will know, okay, it is serious. If they just get the first existing result invalid, they could be getting a smaller number. So this is the things, the experience, and it is effective thing. And make sure the GRM are always functioning throughout the process. People can raise complaint again. So this is the point I would like to share here. Okay, I go back, hand over to the Ines, and you can.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So a couple of quick ones for maybe ADB and AIIB just before we move on. So I think the next one can be broadly, categorized as, what about grievances when it comes to valuation timing? So one question is about the timing of valuation, which is often linked with complaints related to compensation assessments. So the question is, shouldn't valuation be complementary or a part of every project? So why do people complain, when valuations are made? I think it's got to do with the timing of, when the land acquisition plan is originally prepared, or the framework rather, and when the actual valuation takes place. So there's a bit of a disconnect, I think, that people feel, valuation does not take into account what their perceived losses are. So maybe Zara, if you can pick this one up in terms of, what happens in terms of grievances related to valuation timing in the process of land valuation, please.
Yeah, these are all hot topics. ADB's accountability mechanism statistics also shows that most of the complaints that comes from affected people are about compensation. And I'm sure that your grievance mechanisms are showing the same. And unfortunately, there is no final answer and strategy. No, there is no any final answer on how to resolve universally all the complaints. But probably what we discussed on the first day on strategical level, involvement of the valuation specialists in consultations and considering their services in the grievance mechanism is a very important thing. Having TOR with availability of valuation specialists during complaint resolution is the other important thing. Discussing the compensation, the valuation methodology with people during consultations when you are preparing settlement plans. This is one other strategic things that you can do. It's difficult to give a particular answer on a strategy to resolve the complaint. It's very project specific and issue specific. And as Joshin mentioned, it's very important to manage expectations, to develop soft skills of communicating with affected people, to be very open to all the complaints, even if you think you have much more information and understanding on what this complaint is about. Try to understand the complainants, being open to their concerns, and then be very clear and open about the limitations that you have, what you can resolve and what you cannot resolve. And then clearly communicate the affected person on the complaint resolution timelines and the approaches. It's from my experience of dealing with complainants, and at some part of my professional life, I was working only on the complaints from affected people for 2.5 years. So it's really very important to develop that soft skills on how you communicate with people, to manage their expectations and to get their views that will help you to resolve the complaint. Thank you.
Okay, great. And a bit of a curveball question I will direct it at Sue. What happens when a project affected family or a person has been compensated for crops, but their land compensation is still pending? So the payment schedule hasn't basically been followed. Should the land value be revised to reflect current market values or maintain the originally agreed value? Now, this is not a consultation question per se, but is interesting because people will complain about the lateness of payment. So I think it does make sense to address it under the consultation questions. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thanks, Ines. There are several points here. The first one is as compensation has not yet been paid, so affected household can still planting crops on the land. That's the first thing. However, the PMU need to ensure that they informed to the household in the sufficient time, so that the affected household they have sufficient time to harvest the crops once land acquisition is required. That's the first thing. The second one is since compensation has not yet been paid, so the land is still with the landowner. What about the value of the valuation? So it depends very much on how long the delay is. So if it's more than 6 months, and we have two conditions here. One is long term, but the very important is if the land market is dynamic or not. If it's frozen for a long time, so we keep with the conducted the values that conducted. But if the market is dynamic, people ask me, how you define dynamic? We have a transaction, in fact, in the area. Then it's dynamic, right? So normally, if it's more than, it depends on the country. In some countries, it's 6 months. In India, it's 1 year. In Bangladesh, it's 3 years. But we based on the fact that if there are transaction and the dynamic, land market in the area, then we have to do it again. I mean, the valuation. If the delay is more than 1 year, normally this is a normal practice in some country and in some projects. So I hope that my response is clear.
Very clear. Thank you so much. And finally, we will move on to just a few more questions that we couldn't really categorize into either of the previously mentioned ones. So, we just call them other, including depreciation. And to start off with that one, Zara, I won't ask you to provide context because it's hard to provide context for questions that don't really, mesh with each other. But I will ask you a depreciation related question. Is there a time limit to consider when evaluating the salvage value of a structure, particularly if it's old and nearly deteriorated? It's a very, very thought-provoking one. So please take that one to start us off.
Thank you. I will just glance through the question once again. If the structure is very old and almost deteriorated, how to consider cost for salvageable materials? First, we are not deducting cost for salvageable materials. So the first question will be, why do we need to calculate cost for salvageable materials? So compensation is calculated for structures at replacement cost without deduction for all types of structures, irrespectively of the level of deterioration. If project decides as a good practice, and usually in MFI finance projects, it is the applied approach to allow affected people to take salvageable materials, then they are taking the salvageable materials and it is not deducted from the compensation. Any deductions from compensations are not allowed and will not be considered as compliant with the policy. With salvageable materials, one tricky issue is that you need to think through the implementation process of that. Who will be dismantling the structures, who will have right to dismantle, when it should be done, how it is harmonized with construction schedule, etc. But you do not need to calculate cost for salvageable materials because you will not deduct them from the compensation. There is another aspect here. It is semi-constructed structures. When the structure is not fully constructed, for example, somebody started to construct a house and it is just half of the house there. So the replacement cost will be for that semi-structure, for semi-constructed structure, for half of the house. But when it comes to deterioration, we are not reducing the compensation amount for deterioration or salvageable materials. Thank you.
Okay, and a couple of questions that I think I want NDB to pick up. So how should one approach situations where third-party agents are commissioned to handle land acquisition and manage transaction costs specifically related to bribery? Tricky question.
Fortunately, I experienced one similar projects. Okay, I just pick this question because I experienced a project like this. So first of all, we need to understand what do you mean for handle the situation. Okay, so what is the third party role in this process? We need to understand that. First of all, for the role of the third party, they can do to do the valuation, asset or land valuation. They can also play other role, like oversee the process of that, right? So so for my project, so their client actually is a private sector client. They have a very strict compliance department. Each money they paid, they actually need to get audit, things like that. But in my case, the government actually play a very strong role in this process. So in other words, actually the agency appointed to do the valuation had to be acknowledged or accepted by the government departments, right? But however, the client want to play a very active role and to favor their compliance procedure and to avoid bribery, as you mentioned here. So the client just assign a third party to oversee the whole process and get the information, get the client updated or the company updated regularly. So this is the experience I can share with you. Thank you.
Very interesting. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you so much. And another one for you while you're spotlighted, could you provide some examples of long-term leases, either from the state or a company?
Okay, so for this question, I think we have in China, there are many examples I can share with you. It is about a long-term lease. Why? Actually, I already mentioned in my previous discussion with one of the questions. So for China, actually, the longest duration, so you know the land in the rural areas are normally the collective owners or the village committee just provide the land lease or land use right to the individual farmers to farm. And there is a circle of the land use lease, right? It's normally the longest duration is 30 years. But as the development of the local economy, maybe it's more benefit for the people to go out to do some other part-time job and leave their house, their land at home without farming. So the people actually would like to rent their land to others to farm. And then some of the agricultural companies would like to take the land lease or to rent the land from the farmers. And because the operation of agriculture industry is it's kind of a risky, right, for the company. So they would like to have a long land lease duration. So normally it's at least 5 years. For the longest one could be 30 years, but it cannot be longer than 30 years because one circle of land use lease is just 30 years. So this is the issues, the experience I can share. If you want to more detailed things, you can still raise your question. I can give you more detailed explanation for this regard. So the only thing I would like to highlight here is about the price. It's normally based on the fair negotiation and normally adjustable. And it is basically decided by the local market prices. The government actually released a standard, which Professor Shi just mentioned. It is an average annual outcome value of the land for the previous 3, is based on the value of the previous 3 years of the land. Okay, but normally for this kind of lease, long-term lease, the value, the price is based on fairly negotiated. It's not just fully follow the government released standards. Okay, that is the experience I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Guoqing, so much. So now as we conclude the workshop, which spanned over the last 3 Mondays and covered, I dare say, quite a lot of ground on some of the aspects of land valuation and compensation delivery and how, you know, valuators work with NDB E&S specialists. I would first of all like to thank you, my dear participants, for staying so long because we are half hour over time, but I think this is such an interesting topic. Thank you so much for dedicating your time to us. I will quickly give the floor to Zara to give some final thoughts, but I would also like to thank you for being very patient with us. There are so many questions that we could not, you know, we covered a lot of them, but some we just couldn't out of time, interest, catch. We will ask you to provide feedback like we did for the previous sessions. We will try to tailor the, you know, any future sessions on similar topics, you know, to account for you know, this large interest of participants in asking questions. But as I said, we will also try to respond to some of these questions offline. We will think about how to best do it. So Zara, I will just quickly ask you to you know, give a few final thoughts, and then we will then move to closing out the workshop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ines. And I would like to invite Guoqing and Sue for the final thoughts. We still have 89 people in the room and we are running out of time for 20 minutes. I think this is a very good indicator that it was hopefully useful for you. There were so many discussions and questions that I personally learned from, and particularly from contributions of our colleagues from other banks, but also International Valuation Standard Council. And this was our first try to cooperate with such a broader audience. And hopefully we will be able to do more on this cooperative platform with MCDF and other banks, but also inviting other organizations like International Valuation Standard Council to contribute and build capacity of our client. And one personal request to those who are still here, please share in the feedback form that you will respond to MCDF. What type of knowledge products do you think could be helpful? In what format to build your capacity on valuation? And we now have this understanding of what is the difference between valuation and policy. So what will be helpful for you to build the capacity, but also what type of checklists or instruments could be helpful for you as those who are working in the PMUs or for the consultants to support in your work. And thank you so much for being with us for 3 days. Over to my other colleagues.
Thanks, Zara. I have 3 posts that I would like to share with NDB colleagues and 88 colleagues online. I have been involved in the valuation, and the first issue I very often faced with is the client think that replacement cost methodology is the bank methodology. They say, okay, this is ADB methodology of replacement cost, NDB methodology, something like that. We need to clearly discuss and clarify with the client that is we follow the international standard. It's not ADB methodology. ADB has not, I believe that, I don't know if Rara has created methodology or not, but then they thing like that. Okay, still AIIB the methodology about replacement cost is very difficult to follow. That's the first thing. The second one is very important. This settlement plan is the products of the client. It's the government document to prepare and to implement. So the methodology and all the issue with replacement costs have to be discussed beforehand with the NDB so that we can avoid a lot of issue later on. Like the question we received, the methodology in the resettlement plan is very comprehensive, and then later on the government said that no, we cannot follow with that. Is it too complicated? And if you do like that, you are creating or making precedents in how our government finance project can follow you or something like that. So it should be discussed during the preparation of the resettlement plan, or even during the project identification stage to discuss with the government and also the PMU and executing agency and implementing agency. Otherwise, later on, it's caused a lot of problem. The last one, I don't know, but I don't know if NDB faced with it, but I'm sure ADB also has the same. That we have resettlement plan prepared during the following the feasibility study, and then we update it later on using the detailed engineering design, and the gaps maybe 2 years. So not only with the issue of the different replacement cost or the market change or the market dynamic, but the first issue in the feasibility study is if the feasibility study team have resettlement specialist who know about the requirement of replacement cost, they can do the replacement cost study. So now we have some project, the FX teams, social team, they have no idea on the replacement cost. So the resettlement plan they prepare is that the government price put in there, and then so later on it's very difficult to, because the plan is closed, and then people start complaining, oh, why is so low like that? It takes a lot of time to finalize the resettlement plan. And then after that, maybe 2 years after that, we update the resettlement plan. So if the safeguard team have no replacement cost expert, or the government does not recognize or does not know that they need to have a replacement cost evaluation, then again we have to discuss, okay, we have to do that, because if commit that, compensation must be by replacement cost. So if you don't do that, how we can prove that compensation is replacement cost? How to calculate the budget? So again, the issue raised and then discuss and raise and discuss, it takes a lot of time. So the issue of having no replacement cost valuer in the teams of the at consultant and the detailed engineering consultant teams is also the issue. And if the government know that, they should have the valuation team to prepare the replacement cost for land acquisition and resettlement. This is the issue. So basically, it's short 3 issues I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, so much. And with that question, maybe just for one final thought from you, and then I will close out the session. And thank you all for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Very quickly, I just want to share 2 points. The first one, I think it's a very valuable workshop, and it's more than better I imagined. Actually, we brought together so many resources and experts, consultants together to do this workshop. And secondly, I just want to say the most invaluable part for this one is to use our knowledge of what we have learned in our project in the future. And even I think for our partner and the stakeholders, they may be also very interested to learn more the international best practice from us, right? So I think the most important part is incorporate this knowledge together and put it to our project in the future. And ideally can have some demonstration projects in some specific countries or regions to work together to bring this value into the fact. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Zara, Sue, and Guoqing for those very salient points. And also a big thank you to Ben, Professor Shi, and our colleagues from the IVSC, whom we heard from earlier today, who really provided so much context on this big topic. With that, I would just like to remind you participants that the presentations, handouts, and the recording of not only this session, but the previous 2 sessions will be made available. I think you have already received some emails from my colleague, Victoria, but you will also receive another one with the instructions on how to access these materials. Thank you all for your active participation over the course of the workshop. Just to say, especially given the number of questions, that we couldn't really tackle, and there's just so much wealth of information. MCDF will be doing our best to work with colleagues from AIIB, NDB, and ADB to summarize the key points discussed in this workshop in what we call an event report, which will summarize, the key points made in the presentations, but also in the discussions. And this report will be available on MCDF's website and the Jigsaw platform in due course. So we have to write it, we have to edit it, we have to prepare it. So bear with us, but look out on our website, it will be there. And with that, I would really like to thank all of you for participating. Without you, this workshop would not have been such a success. So have a great day, everyone, and goodbye. And yeah, all the best. Thank you.